Hello everyone, I'm Gemma Beall. Welcome to Beyond Second Cognition. After I finished writing my first book, I got a tweak to write a book about parenting. The title of the very unfinished book is called Parenting for the Second Cognition, learning how to not impair your child's natural cognitive abilities. Although not all of our subscribers are parents, we don't know if they are or not, and we've had quite a few people ask us how to raise children in line with the second cognition. So over the last week, I keep having this nag to revisit this topic. Now, if the book will ever manifest into a full book or not is yet to be seen, as it really isn't on my writing docket at the moment. But I do have enough insights and pearls to share regarding child rearing that I would like to share. I was fortunate enough to give birth and raise a wonderful and easygoing child. I always joke around with her that she was born 40 years old because even from birth you could see her soika in her eyes and she just oozed wisdom out of her tiny body. Was I a good mother to her growing up? I personally think I was a decent mom, but she tells me all the time that I was and still am the best mom in the world. But don't kids always say that? If you look around you and listen to parenting horror stories, and everyone has them, even if you don't have children, you understand that parenting is really difficult, and kids are terrors, and it seems to only get worse as they age. If you look at the millennials now, these are the ones raising the future adults, and quite frankly, that prospect is very scary to me. The thing is, I sit there and listen to all these parents say the same thing and talk about the terrible twos and the awful teenage years, yet I have no experience with it because I didn't go through any of that with my child. Am I responsible for raising such a cool kid? Partly, because I think it's an equal responsibility of how I raised her, and she's just an awesome soika. I have very vivid memories of being a kid all the way back to the age of 14 months old. This isn't just sporadic memories. It's a lot of memories from that time without gaps in the memory field. I always assumed I was older than I was, but my parents gave me the timeline. I remember knowing things and understanding things, and I remember getting mad and frustrated with my parents and other adults for treating me like I was stupid. That's how I viewed it at the time. I was fortunate enough that my father realized early on that I was a smart kid and would talk to me and explain things to me, even if he didn't think I was old enough to understand it, but he was the only one that did this. When I had my daughter, I vowed to myself that I would tell her everything. I would always answer her questions as honestly as possible, and I would never tell her because I said so. And I am proud to say that was one promise I kept to myself. When I was pregnant with my daughter, I was given 2 pieces of advice by my boss and my mentor that I took to heart, and I feel every parent and grandparent should have these needle stitched on their hands because it makes absolute sense. But it was also proven effective, and these 2 rules became the starting point of me raising my daughter. 1. Everything a child does is cute. Everything. When they do something, add 5 years to their age, and if the behavior would no longer be cute from a child 5 years older, then put a stop to it immediately. Number 2, never tell the child no. Instead, tell them what you don't want them to do. This was the extent of the advice given to me, so I will explain what these 2 pearls taught me on my own parental journey. Hearing number 1 did not prepare me for having to face the cute factor from a little cherub-faced angel, and it is the hardest thing in the world, to put a stop to something so cute and so adorable, but here's why it's necessary. Children come into this world and have to learn everything. They are mimics. They repeat and do everything they see and hear, and while they are mimicking, they are learning, and they are establishing habits. We all know from our battle with the Hapeem habits that they are incredibly difficult to break. If you put a stop to it immediately, when the behavior first presents, you not only prevent the habit from forming, you give them the opportunity to learn how to self-regulate their behavior. For number 2, if you tell a parent to never tell the child no, oh my soika, you will get death glares. Don't believe me? Try telling a new parent that sometime. That's why I follow it up with, instead of telling them no, tell them what you want them to do. Children, once again, they come into this world and have to learn everything, and they are little sponges that absorb everything. But until they learn everything, each new experience is exciting and new. To a child that doesn't know what no means, how does saying no when they grab an electric cord tell them not to grab the electric cord? It doesn't. Now, if you've ever been around a toddler, say a baby between 6 months to a year old, so not quite a toddler, try telling them no without instructions when they are doing something you don't want them to do, and see what their reaction is. Some of my best advice I learned from my personal experiences is to talk to your babies and continue to talk to them as you raise them. This doesn't mean baby talk them. Matter of fact, I adamantly would not allow anybody to baby talk my daughter. Remember, they learn what you show them, and if you want your child to baby talk, then your child will baby talk. But if you talk to them normally, they will learn how to talk normally. When you work hard to establish two-way communication with them, it is harder for them to break the habit of communicating with you as they get older. So you need to make sure that you talk to them. Explain what you are doing in their presence. Just because you don't think they understand you doesn't mean that they don't, and it doesn't mean that they aren't learning in the process. From the day my daughter was born, I talked to her like I would talk to you. Call it intuition, but I never considered for a second that she didn't understand every single word I said. When my daughter began pulling up and walking around furniture at 5 months old, I took her around the house and told her everything she could touch, everything she couldn't touch, and why she couldn't touch it, and I never had to childproof my house. I reiterate, just because you don't think that they understand doesn't mean that they don't understand you. Each and every person has to realize that the moment they become parents or even grandparents, they become teachers. Yep, that's right, folks. If you are a parent, then you are a teacher, and if you cannot admit this or refuse to acknowledge it, then please do the world a favor and don't procreate. When you become a parent, you have a little human being that is looking to you for everything. They don't just need you for sustenance and maid service. They need you to teach them about life and how to function in this messed up world, because if you don't, someone else will. Do you want to be the major influence in your child's cognitive development, or do you want to be standing on the sidelines, especially knowing what you know about how they are psychologically conditioned by the Marxist agenda pretty much from birth? From the things I see in the world around me about children these days, and even those my daughter's age, I see failures in teaching by parents in the following areas. 1. Impulse control. Children are not taught impulse control. I wasn't taught impulse control. All I was taught was, Gemma, don't interrupt people when they're talking. It's rude. I had to teach myself as an adult what impulse control was and how impulse control is a primal physical form habit that is very difficult to break. If you remember back to your own childhood, do you remember your parents telling you not to interrupt others when talking? Do you remember doing this all the time? If so, look into your childhood mind and recall the internal drive to interrupt. That is the impulse. How many of your parents taught you to control the impulse? I'm only using this one example because I'm 99.9% sure we all did this as children, so we all have the real life example of what goes on in our mind during the impulse. It's the same impulsive Hapeem habit that is responsible for the psychological aspects of addiction, psychotic behavior, just to name a few, and pretty much every ill Hapeem habit any of us exude or continue to exude. When you are tearing down beliefs and someone pokes one of yours and you jump to defending the belief, that is an impulse control habit. Number 2, lack of responsibility. Children are not taught responsibility. We all have responsibilities as human beings, not only to ourselves, but to the world around us. How old do you think the average child is when they learn to pick up their toys? How old do you think the average child is when they start learning how to help with household chores? Or learning how to feed themselves, or being taught how to do all sorts of things? I'm going to use my parenting and daughter as an example. When my daughter began walking on her own without walking around the furniture, she was 9 months old. I began teaching her to put her toys up when she finished playing with them. I also taught her that she didn't need more than 1 or 2 toys at a time to play with, or if she had multiple toys, before she was allowed to grab another, she needed to put something back. This might seem like something minor, but instilling personal responsibilities at an early age tends to create the habit before they start getting indoctrinated at school. Now, this also teaches them moderation. Number 3, lack of understanding. For this one, I want to ask you a question. Do you always understand how to do things with simple instructions, or with no instructions at all? Do you always understand how to do something with detailed instructions? This goes back to not telling children no. You can tell them to do something or not to do something, but without the explanation of why, they might not understand, especially if they are inquisitive and want to understand why they are being told to do something. When you have a child that is a toddler and is just learning the functions of their body, if they have something you don't want them to touch, shouting no or stating no and taking it away from them does not necessarily give them the understanding of why they shouldn't be touching it, nor why you don't want them to. For me, with my daughter, I would take the offending item away from her while saying, "Please don't touch that." And then I would explain in detail why I didn't want her to touch it. As she got older and was able to understand more, I would follow up my detailed explanation with, "Do you understand why I don't want you to touch it?" and ask her to relate it back to me in her own words to make sure that she understood. This served 2 purposes. It allowed her to relate to me that she did understand what I was telling or asking her, and having her put it in her own words helped her gain understanding in her mind. This also saved future arguments that when I would tell her to do something, she couldn't come back and say, "Well, I didn't understand what you mean." And I hear a lot of kids that will sit there and say that to their parents as an excuse for not listening. Number 4, choices. Most children do everything they do because they have been told to do it. I know the rebellious ones have a tendency to not do what they are told, but in my personal experience, both from my own raising as a teenager and my raising a teenager, the more you give them to rebel against, the more they're going to rebel, and by limiting their choices that they can make as individuals, they will rebel because it's not what they want. In other words, their wants are rarely a choice they get to make for the most part. Then you have the neglectful parents that just let their kids do whatever they want, which rarely entertains responsibility, especially the responsibility of listening to others, especially the parents. I remember being angry all the time as a teenager because I never got to do what I wanted to do. I didn't have a choice in the matter. It was no because I said so, and that was the end of the story with my mother. For my daughter, I allowed her certain choices at an early age. When she was 2, I would let her choose what we had for dinner at least 2 nights a week, but the condition of letting her choose dinner was that the rest of the week she had to eat what I chose for dinner without argument. I rarely had a problem with her refusing to eat what I fixed because I explained to her in details what was expected of the agreement. As she got older, I allowed her to make her own decisions about other things, and of course I did set some limits because sometimes kids just don't make good choices. But in every instance I had to override her choice. I always explained why I override her choice and explained why I made the choice that I did in regards to it. I also made sure she understood what I was telling her. Communication. Communication is not an innate trait. Well, let me rephrase that. Verbal communication is not an innate trait. It is something that we must learn as children, but considering the fact that adults really don't communicate with children until they're at least the age of 3 to 5 years old, their abilities to communicate are picked up by observation. Have you seen how most adults communicate? Not a very good example. Communication and trust have to be established early on in the parent-child relationship, and communication is not a one-way street. Talking and listening are the key components of communication, but in any adult-child relationship, is talking and listening happening by both parties, or is it the adult doing all the talking and the child doing all the listening? I want to use an example in this, and if you are a parent, ask yourself, how often do you ask your child what they think about something and listen to them? If you do, how many times do you correct their point of view? Number 6, emotional well-being. Emotions are a part of the human experience, and we all know that emotions governed by the herpes virus runs on steroids. And age is not an indicator of emotional intelligence, but being taught how to express emotions and understanding emotions is also not innate. It is something that's learned. How many adults do you know that teach their children about emotions? Learning to control emotions is something that most adults don't do, so children do not really get healthy education where it comes to their emotions. Children, from an early age, deal with emotional outbursts, and a lot of adults get so uncomfortable about correcting the behavior that they allow their children, especially in public, that they allow temper tantrums and other uncontrollable behavior to continue without putting an end to it. Most will say that the children don't have the capability for reason, but if you explain to them why their behavior is bad, reason can be learned when the child is educated about it. Ignoring the behavior hoping it will resolve itself is like ignoring the wine stain on the carpet hoping it will miraculously go away. It doesn't happen that way. Number 7, self-reflection. Children, for the most part, have no concern over their behaviors or over their responsibilities for their behaviors. How many of you, with your own children, made them self-reflect about their behaviors, good or bad? And with this one, I'm actually going to tell a story. My child was very easygoing. She was very smart, very intelligent. We had great communication, but the moment that she started kindergarten, when she was 5, she became a total shit. The first week of kindergarten, she got sent to the principal's office 3 times. And I do believe in corporal punishment. It was good enough for me. It was good enough for my daughter, but her corporal punishment was not very stern, as in I didn't beat her to death, a tight pop on the butt, and that was about it. But after her 3rd go-round of getting sent to the principal's office, I didn't know what to do. Timeout didn't work, a spanking didn't work, a lecture didn't work. I was at my wit's end. And this was not necessarily me being a good parent. It was me not knowing what the hell to do. So I put her on the spot and said, you tell me what I need to do to correct your behavior. And I made her go to her room and come out when she had an explanation for her behavior and a resolution that what would correct the behavior. And after about an hour, she came out and asked me to sit down, and she told me why she did what she did with her behavior and what punishment she felt she deserved because of her behavior. And this was really her and her 40-year-old wisdom teaching me. It was taking responsibility for herself, but teaching me how to better parent. Because by allowing her that reflective period, it taught her the importance of self-reflection, and to be quite honest, that's when my self-reflection really started. And after that point, we never had any other issues or behavioral problems from her. If ever she was noticing her own behaviors that needed changed, she would actually come sit down and talk to me about it so we could together come up with a solution for her responsibilities over her own behavior. And children are very smart this way, and most adults don't view children to be that smart. But the more you trust them to self-govern and to be self-responsible, the more they're going to respond in the positive manner. And it really does seal the parent-child bond and communication, as long as you listen to them and allow them to share that part of themselves with you. And to be quite frankly honest, you could learn a hell of a lot by doing this with your child. In my personal opinion, children are born into this world at the higher second cognition state of awareness. And it's the parents' responsibilities to foster their cognitive development rather than allowing it to develop by observation, because that only drags them down into the first cognition levels that they must try to rise above once they become adults, if they can. Now that the hive is gone, I see the potential for our future generations, because those children being born now are not being born with a hive infection. So now it's for all of us adults to begin allowing their second cognitive abilities to grow, not atrophy. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to listen and contemplate this information. I'm Gemma Beall. Until next time, stay the course.